Hi, this video will cover everything you'd expect from a comprehensive character guide, including weapons, discussions on attack versus Spectro, sequences and teams, but the focus will be a breakdown of Jinhsi's rotation and her actual playstyle, as well as how her stack mechanic works, so if you're interested in anything specific, please use the timestamps. That said, let's dive right into how she works. Starting off simple, we have Jinhsi's two inherent passives. The first one simply adds a permanently active Spectro damage bonus to all of Jinhsi's damage output. The second increases her intro's multiplier by 50% off its original value, not to be confused with a damage bonus. So if your character sheet states a multiplier of 80, with the passive activated, it effectively becomes 120 instead. This makes Jinhsi's intro the strongest in the game. In terms of total damage, it's technically second to Kalchao's enhanced intro, but that one has very low damage per second as it comes with a long cutscene that demands almost 3 seconds of your timer. Jinhsi's intro is great in other ways too. It's required even to activate not only the 5-piece effect of her best in slot echo set, but also one part of her signature weapon's passive. Perhaps most importantly though, her intro also gives Jinhsi immediate access to the second variant of her resonance skill, for which there are 4 versions in total. This second skill, or just skill 2 going forward, puts her into an elevated state called Incarnation. This state is where all the magic happens and is really the starting point for her core rotation. The only other way to reach Incarnation is to complete a full basic attack string on the ground, which also enables her skill 2. You can speed this up a little bit by swapping into Jinhsi mid-combat, allowing her to skip an attack, but either way this still takes much longer than using her intro. All this is to say that Jinhsi's intro is an essential part of her kit, so unless you absolutely have to, don't commit to a full Jinhsi rotation without her intro. Now that we're in the air, we can piece together the rest of her rotation. As soon as Jinhsi enters Incarnation, she gains access to skill 3 and a completely new basic attack string. This basic attack string is not reset even if you dash or skill 3, or even swap out in the middle of it. Once the basic attack string is complete, Jinhsi automatically gains access to skill 4, so make sure you've cast skill 3 prior to this point to not waste the ability. The instant skill 4 becomes available, Incarnation automatically ends, and Jinhsi can no longer cast her Incarnation basic attacks. Any further basic attack input will instead cause heavy attacks at the cost of stamina, allowing you to extend your rotation by a few hits if you see fit, but be careful as you have to use skill 4 within 5 seconds, otherwise the skill button turns back to its base version and you'll have to start over. Skill 4 is the final version of Jinhsi's resonance skills and marks the end of her core rotation. So to recap, her rotation looks like this: intro, skill 2, skill 3, 4 basic attacks, skill 4. You have a bit of flexibility as to when in the basic attack string you'd like to cast her skill 3, but other than that, this order always stays the same. You don't even have to wait for her 4th basic attack animation to finish. Once you initiate the 4th basic attack, you can go straight into skill 4. Her ultimate, a simple nuke, and the active echo, which we'll look at in a bit, can be used at any point during this rotation. I think all of this makes Jinhsi herself a very easy character to play, as once you commit to her with an intro, there's really not much you have to think about until you finish her combo. After performing skill 4, Jinhsi gains UNISON. A buff that lets Jinhsi trigger her outro and the incoming character's intro on the next swap for free, completely independent of her concerto gauge. Now on paper this may sound like a quick swapper's wet dream where you somehow find ways to spam intros and outros left and right, but really it's mostly a tool to compensate for Jinhsi's low concerto gain. As we've seen so far, Jinhsi's rotation is very short. Despite long animations on skill 4, it has partial time stop, so effectively, one rotation only takes about 7 seconds off the timer and generates exactly half a concerto gauge. Together with an ultimate, this does go up to 70 concerto, but that's still not enough to trigger an outro, and you won't be able to use her ultimate every rotation anyway. Her ultimate has a long cooldown of 25 seconds, so once used it won't necessarily be back up by the next time Jinhsi takes the field, and it also has a 150 energy cost, which is simply impossible to recharge that quickly when one core rotation generates a measly 30 energy. UNISON also has a 25-second cooldown and is here to bridge the concerto gap that occurs every other rotation. You can think of it this way: Jinhsi effectively takes the field twice to complete one cycle. The first time she can use her ultimate and make use of UNISON to trigger her outro. For the following rotation, ultimate and UNISON are still on cooldown, but this time we'll be able to trigger the outro naturally with concerto energy. This repeats from the 3rd rotation onwards. If you take a look at the clip in the background, you'll notice that Jinhsi has almost no downtime. Her ultimate deals great damage, but she doesn't depend on it to function. As long as she has somebody to get her back online with an intro, which Verena is the fastest concerto generator this game has to offer, you can theoretically jump straight back into Jinhsi's core rotation and keep churning out skill nukes. But to play Jinhsi efficiently, reducing the field time of your teammates is only one part of the equation. The other is gaining stacks for Jinhsi's Forte circuit, which we haven't talked about yet. The resource that's displayed as her Forte gauge is called Incandescence and caps at 50 stacks. Any amount of stacks you have built up by the time you cast skill 4 will be consumed to increase the multiplier of that ability by a certain amount. This only applies to skill 4 and is where the majority of Jinhsi's damage comes from. If you can get enough stacks, her ultimate damage pales in comparison to what you can do with skill 4, so we want to make generating stacks a priority. Jinhsi herself and all of her teammates can generate stacks simply by dealing damage with an internal cooldown of 3 seconds. Every attribute has its own separate cooldown though, so if your team deals damage of multiple different elements, you can generate that many more stacks. Additionally, stacks can also be generated specifically through coordinated attacks, at an increased rate of 2 stacks per attribute, again with a 3-second cooldown. This second layer of stack generation is separate from, but not mutually exclusive to the first. Here's an example. Let's say we're dealing Spectro damage with Jinhsi on the field, generating 1 stack per interval. Any off-attribute coordinated attack, for example a Yinlin Judgment Strike, would generate 3 additional stacks at once. 1 stack for dealing damage with a unique attribute, in this case Electro, another 2 for also being a coordinated attack. Verina's ultimate also causes coordinated attacks, but they use Spectro damage, so we're not getting an extra stack from layer 1, since the cooldown for Spectro is shared with Jinhsi's damage, but we do get the additional 2 stacks from layer 2 because they're still coordinated attacks. So right away we can see that we want to pair Jinhsi up with units that offer coordinated attacks as part of their kit. As of this video, there are only 5 reliable sources of coordinated attacks: Verina, Baizhi, Mortefi, Yuanwu, and Yinlin. All other characters are limited to generating stacks on layer 1. I hope this explains why Verina, despite sharing Jinhsi's element, is still a fantastic support choice, whereas Spectro Rover, as unfortunate as it is, does not fit well into a Jinhsi team, because he or she adds nothing at all to Jinhsi's stack generation. Now, even if you do everything right, with a 3-second internal cooldown between gaining stacks, you're simply not gonna get that many, and that's why we have Jinhsi's outro, whose single purpose is to reduce this cooldown from 3 seconds down to 1 second, and this applies to both layers. So now, if we take the example of a Jinhsi Yinlin Verina comp once more, instead of up to 6 stacks every 3 seconds, we're now getting up to 6 stacks every second. What this means for us is that we want to focus on activating her outro as soon as possible at the beginning of a fight, and only then begin to worry about building stacks efficiently. Now that we have a fundamental understanding of her playstyle, let's look at her echoes. Celestial Light is without a doubt her best in slots set, and with a new update, we now have a choice between the Morning Eggs and the new weekly boss Jue as her 4-cost active echo. To make it short, Jue is the better option. First of all, it's a summon, so you're not wasting time transforming into stuff. Secondly, it provides 16% skill damage bonus, which is Jinhsi's main source of damage. And lastly, it also leaves a damage over time debuff on enemies hit with resonance skills that, who would have thought, ticks exactly once per second, meaning that Jinhsi is able to continuously generate Forte stacks for the Spectro element even after she leaves the field. So pick Jue. Obviously, if you have a godly Morning Eggs, you can use that one for now. Or you can use both for a temporary 4-4-1-1-1 setup if RNGesus hasn't blessed you with usable Spectro 3 costs just yet. Just know that you'll lose around 10% damage and that in the long run, you'll want a 4-3-3-1-1 setup with Jue as your 4 cost. Main stats are generally speaking crit damage on Jue if you use a crit rate weapon, otherwise crit rate is usually a bit better. 1 costs are always attack percent, and for 3 costs it's actually close between attack percent and Spectro damage. If you do not have Jinhsi's signature weapon, then double Spectro is always better for you, even if your Jinhsi is at S1. If you do have the signature weapon, at S0, 1 attack, 1 Spectro is about equal to double Spectro. If on top of that your Jinhsi is at S1, then even double attack becomes an option. And just for fun, here are the values for S6 Jinhsi with a maxed weapon. As you can see, the differences are negligible in most cases. Maybe try to avoid double attack at lower investment, but everything else is fair game, so pick what has the better rolls. There's no reason to overthink here. For substats, you'll want around 130 to 140 energy regen to be able to cast your ultimate every other rotation. But as always, this depends a lot on the team, so we might have to revisit this one. Next up are double crit and attack percent, then skill damage bonus, flat attack, and liberation damage bonus, in this order. Basic and heavy damage bonus are dead stats on Jinhsi. Let's look at weapons next. Her signature weapon offers a 19% DPS increase over the standard 5-star weapon, but if you have Jian's weapon or Lustrous Razor, those are good options too. Personally, I'm going with Lustrous Razor and save my pulls for Chang'Li's weapon banner. Among the 4 stars, even though Jinhsi cannot make good use of its passive, The Battle Pass weapon is still a good stat stick, closely followed by Helios Cleaver. If you have none of these, the free craftable 4-star or the 3-star Broadblade of Night would be your next alternatives. When investing in her abilities, the overwhelming majority of her damage comes from her Forte circuit and then her ultimate. Intro and skill contribute relatively little, and her basic attacks are a complete scam. You'll never use these, other than to farm echoes in the open world perhaps, but even then, not worth the resources, in my opinion. As for her Resonance Chain, Jinhsi's S1 grants a damage increase to her skill 4. For an S1, a 14% damage increase is quite significant, so maybe she's not a bad candidate to buy Wave Band from the shop for. Let me know what you think. S2 eliminates the weakness that Jinhsi has in her first rotation where she's not able to build many stacks, and simply gives her 50 stacks at the beginning of the fight. Insane damage increase, but it loses value over time, so as an average for 8 rotations over a duration of 2 minutes, which is what you're aiming for in the tower to get 3 stars, S2 provides a much more reasonable DPS increase. Still great quality of life for the open world though. S3 provides a significant attack increase to Jinhsi, S4 grants an all-type damage bonus to the entire team, S5 enhances Jinhsi's ultimate damage, and S6 takes her skill 4 to the moon. In S6 Jinhsi deals well above twice the damage of S0. Lastly, teams. From what we've learned about Jinhsi's stack generation, we want either Baizhi or Verena in the healer slot, with Verena being slightly better due to quicker rotations, but Verena is probably busy carrying the rest of your account, so Baizhi is totally okay as well. If you have her at S4, she's even able to generate more stacks than Verena over the course of a fight. In the sub DPS slot we want Yinlin, Mortifi or Yuanwu. All of them can generate stacks just fine, some probably better than others, but I'll hold off on making a judgment as to who is best here for now, and potentially follow up on this in a couple of days. For now, you can't go wrong with any of them. If you want to play none of these, and maybe you're chasing a thumbnail with the biggest yellow numbers, then yes, Taochi does amplify skill damage, but we'll have to find a way to make her work, because not only does she not have coordinated attacks, she also has very long rotations, which is the complete opposite of what Jinhsi needs. Again, Jinhsi doesn't really have downtime, so any time spent on your other units is time not spent on Jinhsi. So generally you want to avoid slow concerto units, unless they can at least provide coordinated attacks to make up for it. But if you've got something up your sleeves, do let me know, and maybe we can make her work somehow. Sanhua at least rotates quickly, but her outro is useless on Jinhsi and again, no coordinated attacks. And Rover doesn't generate any stacks that Jinhsi doesn't already generate herself, so you'd lose more damage from a lack of stacks than you would gain through 10% resistance shred. Once things become a bit more established, I'll see if there's a need for a dedicated step-by-step team rotation guide, but until then, I hope this has been helpful. If so, please subscribe to the channel for more guides like these, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks!